Hey everybody, it's Xixiao here from SalesforceWay.com. Today I want to spend some time to quickly talk about a small topic. I want to focus on this small topic, yet it's very, very important for all Salesforce programmers, especially if you're writing a lot of Apex. So what is this topic? It's about the application configurations. So let's start drawing some stuff over here. So we have the Lightning platform. We have Lightning platform, and on top of the Lightning platform, when we write applications, we need to do the configurations. What are the two methods we're using? First one is called the custom settings. We have the custom settings the older way, and then we have the metadata type, which is the newer way. So Salesforce is more moving to the metadata type because it's a metadata. It can easily migrate it to another org, and also this is the better way nowadays. So always Salesforce recommended to use this. But either one of them can do the application configurations. And of course, our Apex code can easily communicate with either one of them. For example, if you're talking with the custom settings, you can use the get instance method. If you're talking about the metadata types, then you can easily use the SACL, just like how you query to the custom object. It's the same thing to talk with your metadata types. So 90% of Salesforce developers, including me, of course, are writing the code like this. But I realized that recently it's a bad idea to do this. Instead, we always need to create a wrapper in the between. So we need to have this intermediate layer between the custom settings or metadata types and your Apex code. The reason is that when we write Apex code, basically we have production code and unit test code. So it's really hard for us to split the production code and unit test and when we have a direct communication with either one of them. Because the unit test, the best practice for the unit test is that if you don't need to do any DML action, you don't need to write into the database, then you do not do that. But if your Apex code is having direct communication with the custom settings or metadata types, a lot of times you realize that you just have to do the inserting. So you have to fetch the custom settings and then change the configurations a bit, then save it back, and then start to do the unit tests, right? But that is a bad idea. Why is that? So today we're going to write some code using Visual Studio Code to talk about how to implement an intermediate layer, and then we're going to check together why this intermediate layer is important. Okay, let's jump into our coding. Now let's jump into Visual Studio Code, and I've set up a Scratch org just to speed up the video time. The Scratch org, and then I created a custom setting called app config __c. It contains a field which is a boolean. It's a checkbox called diagnosis enabled. So this is the sample case, the custom setting for us to play around. And then I also created called a setting wrapper class. This is the main thing we're gonna play around in this video to create the logic to implement that intermediate layer. Okay. So the first thing we really need to do is I will start typing some code, and in the meanwhile I will start to explain the logic a little bit. So the first one is test visible, and we are gonna create a private static app config test config. So this is the test visible means this property in the setting wrapper class is only visible in the unit test. Why is this important? Why do we put this test visible? We're going to check it soon. And then another thing we really need to do is we need to have a one-to-one mapping to the app configure __c, the custom setting. So that custom setting contains the diagnosis enabled boolean. So in this case, we're going to create the public static boolean I'm gonna give it maybe give it the same name, diagnosis enabled, and we're gonna use the get. So we're gonna return something. Okay, so this diagnosis enabled is gonna map to the app configure custom setting property, a one-to-one mapping. Okay, and now the main part is coming to the following one. Let's private static app config underline C. Let's say the get config. So mainly here, this get config function, we're going to implement certain logic that fulfill both the unit test and the production code. What it really does is for production code, so let's say production code, then what you're going to do is go to DB, fetch the record, and then do whatever needed to do. If it's a test code, then instead of go to database, you should go to memory, or maybe create a test config in the memory, and then do something. The difference here is that for production code, you may need to go to the database, but for the unit test, if you don't need to do DML or you don't need to go to the database, then definitely do not do that. It's the best practice for the unit test. If you don't need to always go to a database, it saves a lot of time. The evil for the unit test in the Salesforce is that sometimes we just have to reach the database to fetch the data. So if you don't do that, then it will drastically increase the unit test speed. So these two things are the main logic we need to implement in this get config. This is also the main reason we need to implement this intermediate layer. So let's start coding a little bit here. What I can start thinking of is remember that we have this test config here, which is only the unit test that can access this property. So what I'm going to start is that if test.is running test. So if it's a unit test, and the test config is not none. So which means if it's a unit test and this test config has been already given an instance, then basically what we need to do is to return the test config. Okay, this is the first step. The second step is that if it's a production code, or if the test config is none, then what we're gonna do, we can, let's say app config, we can really go to the database now to get that instance, which is maybe I'll call it setting, to get instance. So here I assume that this app configure application, the application has already have a record with the name called default, and then now here's that we will fetch that default setting from let's say from Salesforce instance, and then if we couldn't really find it, or if it is still is running test, if it's still in the unit test, or if the production code couldn't really get to the default record or the custom setting record, basically what we really want to do now is to create the default record, right? This is something we always do when we play around with the custom settings. So now what we need to do is to the setting equals to new app config. This is the thing, and then assign the value as the default one, which is a setting dot diagnostic enabled. This is the one, right? I assume this is, I mean in my case I set the default configuration as true, this diagnosis enabled. And then the next step is that if it's a production code, we should save this default back to the a Salesforce instance, right? So still we will use is test is running test. If it's let's say if it's not running test, what we're gonna do is do database, do the insert setting, right? We created the default settings. Now we are inserting it. If it's not production code, then we do not insert it. What we're gonna do is else we're gonna only assign these settings to the test config, right? So this is basically what we want to do here. And after these steps, it means that if it's a production, already has the default record inserted. If it's the test, then the default is created in the memory and then is assigned to the test config in this execution context. And finally, I think what we really need to do is to return the settings. Let's see, where should I return the settings? I think this is the place. Return setting here. Okay, let's think about if the logic is correct here. We have the settings returned. So if it's a production, it's inserted into the database, and then finally we return. If it's a test code, it does not insert, it assigned to the test configure, then need to return the setting. Oh, I think it's correct here. So I remove here. So again, here the purpose is that if it's a test code, you do not do any database DML here. And if then now I can just remove my comments. And here, let's go back. Basically, the one-to-one mapping, what it really needs to return is get config which returns the setting, which is the app config _C, which has diagnostic enabled. I think this is mainly what we really want, right? Okay, let's see if it works. It looks like it works. Because I've actually played around with this code multiple times, so this is definitely not the first time for me to write it. So if you don't get it for once without any compile errors, I mean, this is not natural. I didn't do it. I practiced multiple times. So just to make it more precise, is that let's create another test. Let's see how we are setting wrapper test. Is test. We don't need this. Is test. I do not pay much attention with the capital letter here, but in production code definitely pay attention to that, even though the Apex is not case sensitive. Let's say public static void test setting, whatever name. So basically what we need to do here is so we will create a app config test how would I say config test. The naming definitely we need to pay a bit more attention later. A new app config. It's like this, right? So config test dot diagnosis enabled equals, let's say force here. So now we have this, and what we're gonna do is the app was it app writer setting wrapper dot test config. So here is the trick. So because this test config property in the setting wrapper class is only accessible in the unit test, right? Do you remember we have set this test visible only is visible in the test? So because here we created a configuration in the memory, then we assign to the setting wrapper, and later whatever start test. Without this guy, stop test, whatever you do here, then here the final system dot assert do this. So maybe we say it's false, and let me think about it. So it's a setting wrapper dot diagnosis enabled, then the message would be diagnosis setting should be false. Okay. Alright, so this is what we did. Let's see if it works. Let's think about it. So we assign the instance to the test config, and it is actually a unit test. And now in the system assert, we call the setting wrapper to get the diagnosis enabled property. If we go back to our code, so we reached here because the system assert we want to get the diagnosis enabled. It will go to the get configure function and get this one, and then go to the get configure because it is running a unit test, and the test configure is already assigned the value. It's not none anymore. Then immediately it will return the test config. This is what we want. And the test config dot diagnosis enabled, this is the value, and that value actually is false, right? If you check the simple code logic here. And let's try to push to the scratch work now. Let's see what things were done wrong. Variable does not exist diagnosis 666 config test. Was it underlined? Let's see. I just hate when I don't have a big monitor. Okay, so now there's no error. So in Visual Studio Code, you go to this tab, you refresh, you will get to, if you want to run all the unit tests, you click this green arrow. It will start to run all the unit tests here, but here I have only one, so I will just use that. You see, it's passed. So if I put it here true, definitely it will fail. Let's push the scratch org and rerun the unit test. You see it failed. Okay, so this is the code. I'm gonna also make a GitHub repo and put down below in the video description in case you want to check this simple code. The beauty of this intermediate wrapper is that when you write a test, you don't really care about too much extra logic. What you need to do is create a custom configuration in the memory, then you do whatever you need to do with your application, and then finally you do the asserting to check. Of course, here it's a simple case. I just check if the custom setting has the correct value set or not. But the meat actually comes from this get configure. You see, this code actually checks whether it's the test environment, or is that unit test, or is the production environment. The code here is a little bit messy. If you are a clean code evangelist, then maybe here you want to make it maybe looks a bit better or extract it to a separate private method, but that's not the purpose for this video. So here I just want to let you know to create the intermediate layer in long term definitely will save you a lot of hassles for the team as well, so this is definitely a good thing. So I will commit this code to GitHub, and then I will save it and put it down to the video description. And the next video, I'm gonna also create about the custom metadata types. Custom metadata types is a bit different, and definitely it's the same kind of framework. Like here, create the intermediate, but the intermediate has slightly different kind of patterns there. And here, where do I learn this? I learned this from Dan Appleman's Advanced Apex Programming. A high kind of shout out to Dan Appleman. He really has a good content in his book. So I will put the Dan Appleman's book down below in the description as well if you want to buy this. Okay, I will stop the video here, and if you enjoy this video, definitely subscribe to my channel. I will share more things I've learned along the way, and definitely, not only read the book, you need to practice. Like I have practiced this a lot of times. That's why I didn't get the compiling error. But I mean, definitely to hands-on like what I did. I'm sharing this knowledge with you. If you like this video, repost it, reshare it, and hit the like button below, and definitely join the channel, SalesforceWay channel. See you next time. Bye bye.